a disadvantage because it makes it hard for us to see all of our clients and build the kind of relationships that we'd like to build with them as we move towards proving them innocent and getting them out. And it also, of course, takes greater expense to, get out to see them and work on their cases if they're far away.
If they're very far away, how often do you use the telephone are you able to call them, or do they have to call you? How does that work?
Yeah, so in Florida, and I imagine it's like this in other states, when you're a lawyer and you're representing someone, you're able to make requests for legal calls that are, not part of the recorded conversations that exist on the phones on the walls that people have to pay exorbitant fees to use. And so we can really set up phone calls at whatever frequency you want. And I would say that, we have a system here where, based on client need and where we are in the case, they get more or less communication. Naturally want to focus on the people who need it the most based on what's going on in their case. So we do have the ability to talk to clients. Sometimes clients who are really in the thick of current litigation, we might talk to them once a week. Other folks we might talk to quarterly. It just depends on what's going on in their case.
I see.
But we try to see all of our clients at least once or twice a year in person.
Oh, okay. Very good. All right. So I think people have a very much clearer idea of how the Innocence Project of Florida works. And now we would really like to talk about one specific case, and it's the case of Dean McKee. Can you take us back to the point where the Innocence Project of Florida began its investigation of the McKee case, so our listeners get an idea of how long in his particular case it took to overturn Dean's conviction?
Sure. So, a lot of times people write to us and, back in the day, it used to take us a little bit of time because of our staffing issues to be able to dig into any one case. And so Dean wrote us towards the back end of the last decade, so 2008, 2009, and we really started digging into his case in 2010 and realized that he had what was already a pending request for DNA testing in the courts in Tampa. And that, in fact, the courts had already kind of, I think they had already kind of screwed it up, and so, and that he was really suffering from, a lack of representation, a lack of advocacy of people who understand both the science and the procedure of how to accomplish, this issue with DNA testing. And he, so we were like, look, we need to get involved in this case. And his was an interesting case because, it wasn't like a lot of our other cases. Again, as I said before, we're really trying to look for those cases where, like take a rape case, for example. We know that a perpetrator of a rape leaves, certain biological substances behind that are a byproduct of the sexual interaction, such that when we have a rape kit, we have swabs that have those substances on them. We can test them, and it's really cut and dry. But in Dean's case, his was the crime that happened in his case was a murder of a black man who was a vagrant who was sleeping on the sort of near the front door of the Tampa Museum down there on the waterfront in Tampa. And this wasn't a case where we have a sort of a mistaken identification. In fact, Dean was there that night. Him and his brother and two other young people, Dean was only 16 years old at the time, were coming home from a club going back to Pinellas County. They were coming back from a club in Ybor City, and they were inebriated and needed to, relieve themselves. And they went up to the balcony of the Tampa Museum, and they found this vagrant man who was getting ready to go to sleep. And at the time, Dean was sort of under the influence of his older brother, Scott. They were both avowed skinheads, white supremacists, active in that community in the Tampa Bay area, which was, it was a community of white supremacists, of racists. It was on the rise in the 1980s, particularly in that area. And, so this crime, which led to this poor man being beaten and stabbed to death, was, racially motivated crime. So this was a little different than anything we had worked on. But from the DNA side of it, it had really important evidence. So the victim, they took fingernail scrapings from the victim, because oftentimes when you have a stabbing, a victim who's stabbed they'll usually try to block the stabbing, and oftentimes will scratch or make contact with their fingers on the perpetrator's skin, either on their hands or maybe their mouth or nose or something, trying to fight them away. And which is why law enforcement collects those fingernail clippings. So Dean was already in litigation to get this evidence tested. And in fact, they had done the testing and had a result. And what they failed to do was get Dean's DNA profile, his own sample, to do that, test that DNA profile and compare it to the profile they had from the fingernail clippings, because obviously it's not enough to do the DNA testing. You have to try to determine whose DNA it is or whose DNA it isn't. And so that's kind of where we entered the case, to try to get the case back on track, because the court totally screwed it up, and they really needed to finish the process of the DNA testing by getting Dean's DNA and comparing it. Because look, if it wasn't his, that might tell us something about how this crime did or didn't happen that would impact how we viewed Dean's innocence, particularly because, from our review of the case and our collection of materials, it's pretty clear to us that his brother might have been the person who did this crime and actually framed Dean for it. And we wanted to have the ability to maybe able to use DNA testing to begin to prove that theory.
That is fascinating. Now, we are almost out of time, but we have asked you to come back for a next podcast to talk in even more depth about the case. So in the minutes that we have, I wanted to make it clear how you did mention how young Dean was, but when he contacted you for help with the case, how many years had he already been in prison at that time?
Yeah, so this crime happened on December 20th, 1987, and he was convicted in 1988. So it was 20 years or more by the time he had contacted us. And so it had been a long time, and he had spent over 2 decades in prison at that point.
And why had he or someone in the family, why had no one contacted you to try to get him out of prison if he was maintaining his innocence?
Well, he did reach out to us, and a lot of times what happens is someone will reach out to us, and our process is a necessarily slow one, and we have a lot of people writing to us, and so it oftentimes takes a long time for us to get a handle on the case. And in the meantime, he understandably made use of the mechanism that was in place to get DNA testing and did it on his own.
I see.
And you can see the difference between when someone tries to do it on their own, and they're not a lawyer, they don't have any legal training, and he found himself in sort of a procedural mess because the court screwed up the process, and it took us getting involved to get it on the right track.
Right. I see. All right. Well, I'm trying to think if there's maybe one more short question that I could ask you. A question I wrote down to ask is, what might have been a hurdle that you couldn't get over in freeing Dean? Might it have been missing DNA? Was that the key to his case?
So I think so just to be clear for your listeners, once we got his DNA profile and compared it to the fingernail clippings, we found that he was not the contributor of the DNA underneath the fingernails. And so we know from scientific studies that foreign DNA is very rarely gets under people's fingernails, except in instances of, violent crime or like those kind of violent interactions or intimate, sexual interactions. And so the science suggests that when you do find that foreign DNA, which we had here, foreign to the victim, that wasn't Dean, that is suggestive that it was left there by someone who had a violent interaction with this person. And so that suggested to us that the crime might not have happened the way that it said it did. So that was the hook to get back into court to reinvestigate the whole case.
That's perfect to close on. All right. Well, thank you, Seth. And we will invite you to come back to continue talking about this fascinating case. And thank you for being with us today. And we will see you next time on Pursuing Justice.
I look forward to it. Thank you.